All right, so let's talk about motivation. Not motivation in the sense of you lost at a sporting event or you didn't do as well as you wanted to at a show, and now you're coming back to win it. I'm talking about real life motivation, overcoming significant odds and obstacles. I want to talk about a period in my life where I almost lost it all, and Sci-Unison Fitness was this close to really not happening or me abandoning it. I almost had to abandon the pursuit of Sci-Unison Fitness and having the business and growing and excelling and even making it to the point where I'm at now. This would all go back to 2009, 2008 into 2009. I had a friend, very close friend. This is not his fault at all, but I had a close friend who knew of this thing, an investment firm called AGAPE World Inc. It was run by a guy named Nicholas Cosmo, and they were supposed to specialize in bridge loans. So long story short, instead of, someone wants to build a big shopping center, instead of them getting a loan from the bank at a high interest rate, this company would gather money, small money from a large pool of investors, okay, and then pay out higher interest to those investors. That was the whole pitch. Initially, at first, of course, I'm always very skeptical. It seemed too good to be true, the payouts seemed too good to be true, but I started to find out that there was a lot of people who were involved in this and doing this, people I knew, personally was close to, who were getting these interest checks like clockwork. There was no hiccups, no issues for a long period of time, and it seemed like, wow, like, this would be a good avenue to increase money. My goal with Agape and investing into this bridge loan company, which turned out to be a Ponzi scheme, was not to get rich quick, get rich overnight. The main thing was to provide my business with some money at the jump, to keep me elevated and afloat, so I can properly build everything and go from there. And then on top of that, I wanted to have, my family who, growing up, yes, we had a house, we had food, so I was very fortunate at that, but we were definitely very low income. My father had left my mother without a trade, it was that, no child support, no nothing, typical deadbeat father. Left my mom with a lot of bills, there was bankruptcy, there was a lot of shit that happened. Growing up, my mom, my grandmother, my family worked to give me as much as they could. And I think they did a very good job at that. But in the process of doing that, trying to overcompensate in some aspects, debt started to acquire. And I knew of that early. And another avenue for Agape was, again, not get rich quick. Like, this was not like my ticket to that. It was more like, if we can increase revenue into the house, we could pay down certain bills, pay off the house, stuff along that nature. So I started to draw in, my mother to get involved in this as well. So at that time, I had really no money. I had good credit somehow. I never missed any payments. So what happened was I did the math on these loans. This company was promising 10 to 12% interest every 10 to 12 weeks. So the call was to take out a loan. I took out a loan. I don't even know how I fucking got approved for this loan, but whatever. Took out a loan for, I think it was like $14,000. I convinced my mother to take, I think, $14,000 or $15,000 out against the house to invest. And then on top of that, I realized that I could take my personal credit cards to pay Sci-Unison Fitness and take that money and invest that as well. Some of these cards I had 0% interest on. Some of the interest rates were very, very low. So if I'm getting paid X amount of interest every 10 to 12 weeks versus the interest on the whole year, the APR, it just made sense, to max out these cards because it was going to make it back. So everything was on paper legit. So I maxed out a couple of credit cards and took all that and invested it into AGAPE. So now the first couple of months were great. You got some interest checks like, oh, I saw this money. Some money I took out to spend on some business expenses, and some other money you had the option to take the money and to roll it over. So at that point, I felt like I made a good decision. It was going well. There was no worries, no concern. I really thought like, wow, this could be good for me. And then I remember the day, I was sitting downstairs in the basement. When I lived in the basement, I had the office in the basement as well. This was before I moved the office to the garage, and that's before I moved the office up here on the top floor of the house. I remember sitting in the basement office, and I had the little TV. I was on my 2-monitor. I made quite the upgrades since then. I had the 2-monitor computer. I was sitting there doing some working on charts. And I had a little TV to the side. I was watching the news like I always do. And I remember sitting there, and I remember hearing about Bernie Madoff. I've heard the name before, and they were talking about the Bernie Madoff Ponzi Scheme. And I was like, oh, wow, that sucks. And then it spilled over into how he's going to be, they're going to try to bring him up on charges, and they found out he was running this elaborate Ponzi scheme, and that he was enticing investors to invest and promising abnormal returns. The return, and I remember it exactly, promising returns of 10 to 12% on their investment every 10 to 12 weeks, and how that was nearly impossible and unsustainable. And once I heard that, my heart sank, because I'm like, oh shit, that is exactly what's happening with me. So nearly the same interest rates and the same time frame. And my heart sunk at that point, because I was like, oh God, is it too good to be true? And is Nick Cosmo's AGAPE the same thing? And immediately I got on the phone with the people I knew and voiced my concerns. And once the Madoff thing happened, where Madoff was exposed as a Ponzi scheme, other people had heard that as well and had the same fears as me. And this is how the Ponzi schemes collapse. Once everyone heard of that and got worried, people started to pull money out. Once mass amounts of people start pulling money out of the Ponzi scheme, that's when the whole fucking thing collapses. And that's exactly what happened. Nick Cosmo, he held these bullshit conference calls with hundreds of people on the line, I remember, and he's promising everyone, no, this is legit. And then he started trying to sell insurance. So now it's like he had all this money, people are taking it out. Now it's like, right now, spend a couple $100 extra and protect your money or investment with this insurance. It was just this scam to get more money. And I just had a bad feeling. That was a horrible Christmas. I had a feeling that something was coming, and then it just imploded. He was arrested on January 26, 2009. And I remember that day. That's when it was. I had the feeling it was coming, and then when it came, it was one of the worst days of my life to realize that this fucking scumbag had stole money from not just me and my family, but other people's families. This wasn't like he was stealing from the rich people. He was stealing from, Long Island, New York, middle income, low income people, promising these people everything. There were some people mixed in there who were using it as a get rich quick scheme. Don't get me wrong, but there were horror stories of people who lost, their kids' college funds, soldiers who were fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan. They were investing money with him so this way they can help their family out when they come home. All that money gone. So it was probably the worst the worst feeling of my life. To one, not have the money and the income and the business that I have now. Was just starting off. I just had abandoned teaching. This was my life preserver to keep me afloat, and that money was gone. So not only was that money gone, I was stuck with the $15,000 loan, the credit cards that I maxed out, and I lost. Although the money came from the house, it wasn't dipped out of the pocket of my family. It still was. I lost my family money, and looking back, I didn't even want to live at that point. I had so much fucking rage in me that it took a lot for me to not do something stupid, to know that this slime bag is out there, and to lie to people, to lie to me, like, that's something where I was like, oh man, you motherfucker, and I just remember sitting there for hours, just, I didn't know what to do, what I was going to do. I had no idea where I was going to turn. At that point, I was like, that's it. Sci-Unison Fitness, that dream is over. I started to break out the books again, and I was like, you know what? I can't chase this dream. I'm going to have to go back to teaching. And, I started to take some subbing jobs, and, I was going to have to go back to what I went to school for. I was going to have to get the teaching job, and it was just, it was defeat. It was a real hard time. Nothing against teachers. It's just not for me. But the point that, like, I stepped away from it. I wanted to build something and pursue something, and I was just getting started, and it just seemed like it was gone. It was rough. So I did the subbing. I was going to go back into that direction, and then I just made the decision one day to just back up a little bit, let the wound heal. I had to live real tight. To get those bills paid. That was a very expensive mistake. I was gonna declare bankruptcy, but I decided not to. I didn't want to affect my my long-term credit, and I didn't want that type of bailout. Like, it's almost like I felt the pain, and I knew I deserved to feel the pain. It was a very expensive life lesson, and I'll never make that mistake again. It taught me the value of $1. At that point, it was like, oh well, I'm making fictitious money with money that's not even mine by finagling stuff and balancing things. But boy, let me tell you, when that shit fell, I lived. There was no using credit cards after that. It was just debit card cash. If I only spent what I had. Sometimes I was tight. I had to do other projects to make additional money to make ends meet, and then in the end, it really lit a fire under my ass. Like, all right, we gotta get this moving. If this is gonna work, you gotta have, like, at the end of 2 years, you got to assess where this is. If you're gonna chase this dream, you got 2 years. You got to see where you're at in terms of paying off these bills, or else you're really gonna have to go to teaching. So I really focused and set my mind to making this shit happen, and I was able to pull myself out. I think I officially paid off all of the debt in I think it was 2014, I believe. I paid it all down to zero, and it was a costly mistake, but to be able to pull myself out of that hole, to look back of me sitting down on the floor, just not wanting to live, like, going from that, like, I remember that feeling of, like, nothing matters now, it's over, to life is going to be rough now, it's going to suck, I'm going to have to abandon a dream, but I'll survive, to wait, maybe I can make this work, to that day when that last bill was paid off and it was just down to zero. I remember hustling in 2014. Money was coming in. I still was living tight, though, because all that money's coming in. I'm like, you know what? I want this shit gone. Boom, big payment. And it felt good to actually do that. So that is a big motivational comeback story of my own. I work very hard for this business. And some people may think like, oh, he's so arrogant and he's so this and this and that. Some people may think that, all this shit came easy. It didn't. I worked my ass off every day. I've been working my ass off since day one, and I had some major hurdles. No one gave me no handouts. I didn't have big backing and big financial help from, my family and stuff like that. Like, they provided for me as I was younger, but it wasn't like, oh, hey, I want to start a business, and it's like, oh, that's fine. Like, here's a couple $1,000 and we'll make sure you're taken care of, and oh, you want to go to school for that too? Like, we'll pay your tuition. It wasn't like that. It was very difficult, and this costly mistake at the jump was something I didn't think I was going to be able to overcome. But looking back, I feel like I've always been, pretty hard-nosed, but surviving the AGAPE situation made me really find out like what I was made of, and it made me hard as nails. So at that point, I knew if I could overcome that and overcome those feelings at that time, when I was that vulnerable, that I could pretty much overcome really anything. So yeah, so that's a nice little, well, not nice, a little insight into motivation and overcoming things that I had to overcome that isn't necessarily fitness related, but if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't have this fitness business. So hope you enjoyed.